Sleep training doesn't teach a baby how to sleep. It just teaches them to stop crying and stop signaling because nobody is coming. They're not self-soothing. They're just passing out from exhaustion. Is there any truth to this?
We can theorize and give opinions all day long, but my core question comes down to where is the data that shows a sleep training as the intervention and then harm as an outcome?
Has anybody looked at brain scans or studied cortisol and then determined whether or not sleep training is good or bad? There's this very viral read. It has like 7 million overviews, which says that you have to co-sleep until your child is 7.
These are shock tactics that people like to use on social media to get lots of followers. They say with utter confidence as if this is like written down somewhere in stone based on lots of studies. It all comes back to, well, be a critic.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Indian Parent Podcast, the podcast that is redefining parenting in Indian families. I am Rinie Gupta. I'm a pediatric sleep consultant, and every Friday we release new episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So do subscribe and follow us for the latest updates. It is really hard to be a parent in this day and age of social media. One thing we can all agree is that social media is full of contradicting information that leaves new parents completely puzzled about what's the right thing to do for their baby. One of the hottest debate topics is sleep training. On one side, there is this lobby of experts and parents who are calling it safe, effective, and a complete parenting game changer. On the other side, there are other parents and other experts who call it traumatic. They liken it to abuse and they say that the child stops crying because they know that nobody is coming. I mean, these are completely polar opposite views and it can be hard to tell which one you should believe. What does the research say? What does the objective evidence tell us about sleep training, which is not being colored by anybody's personal opinion? So if you're a parent in the trenches of sleepless nights and you're basically confused whether or not you should sleep train your child, this episode is for you. In this podcast, we are going to interview Dr. Sujay Kansagra, who is a pediatric neurologist and a sleep medicine physician at the Duke University in the US. He's popularly known as That Sleep Doc on Instagram and TikTok, and he's out there educating people about the importance of sleep and basically telling them to go to sleep instead of doom scrolling through the night. We're going to talk about the various statements and claims about sleep training that we see floating all over social media and ask about the evidence-based truth behind them. Now, luckily, we have decades worth of research on sleep training, but you and I don't exactly keep up with it. But guess who does? Dr. Kansagra. He has done and published several studies in the field of sleep medicine, which makes him one of the most credible experts that we can go to ask for objective facts, not opinions, about sleep training. So without further ado, let's get this conversation started and welcome Dr. Kansagra on this podcast. Hello and welcome, Dr. Kansagra. Thank you for coming on our show. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I had a great night of sleep, so I'm ready to podcast.
As a sleep consultant myself, I help parents in sleep training. I'm very deep into this infant sleep world, and I'm very aware of how heated and polarized it is. And we are so glad to have you today to offer facts, not just opinions, about sleep training, right? That's the whole purpose of this podcast today.
That's right. It is tough to be a parent these days with all the opinions out there, and it's hard to distill opinion from fact. So always nice to talk.
Absolutely. And before we get into the podcast, I do want to give a shout out to your book. This is for every sleep deprived parent out there. The book is so simple and straightforward. My child won't sleep. This is the book you want to pick up. I do want to set the context for this podcast because this is a Modern Indian Parent Podcast. You know, all our listeners are from the Indian community. And I think it's so great that the fact that you are Indian as well, but you are so deep into this research, it sort of gives a credible face to this. Because the thing with the Indian community is that sleep training is a very far-fetched idea. Like majority of the families in India are co-sleeping. And even in that, majority of them are bed sharing. Like there was a study done in Bangalore in which it was shown that 98% of the families are co-sleeping, and out of them, 89% are bed sharing, and the remaining are room sharing. So you can imagine a very small percentage of parents are making their baby sleep separately, forget independently. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine just how foreign the concept of sleep training can be in Indian families. And because of that, it always invites a lot of criticism because I think we are always afraid of things that we don't know and we don't understand.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I have a little bit of that cultural context background as well. So my parents were born and raised in India and have strong cultural roots, and we as children, even though we were born in the United States and raised here, still have strong cultural roots and understand some of these intricacies when it comes to Indian culture, South Asian culture, and the approach to sleep.
This is exactly what we're going to keep in mind while we're having these discussions, because in the West, a lot of the content creators and experts are coming out there and speaking against sleep training. And they're saying that families there are pressurized to sleep train, and then they're kind of like trying to go away from that. And in India, it's the complete opposite, where sleep training is not even presented as an option. And if a parent does like to sleep train, they're criticized, they're put down. I have worked with families who have successfully sleep trained their kid. Their kid is sleeping like 11, 12 hours at night, and they're still second guessing it. They're still thinking, did I do the right thing by my child or by my family? So this conversation is going to be like a major, like, mind opener, groundbreaking thing that parents can turn to, when they're trying to answer that question, whether or not I should sleep train. All right. So really glad to have you here. Let's get right into it. And the first sort of statement that I want to run by you, which, we always see, is that sleep training doesn't teach a baby how to sleep. It just teaches them to stop crying and stop signaling because nobody's coming. What do you have to say about that?
I would ask those people to find a child who essentially stopped crying whenever they need something from the parents. So when we apply theories like, for example, learned helplessness, which we can get into, the whole theory is that the child no longer will request assistance when they are stressed or in trouble. And I would tell you that children that sleep well during the day, if they are hungry, or if they fall down and hurt themselves, or if they're scared, they are going to cry and signal to their caregiver. I've never met a child that just stops crying day and night because they have learned that no one's coming to help them. It just doesn't exist. And so, no, sleep training is not teaching a child that no one's coming to help them. It's teaching them a very important skill, which is the ability to actually go to sleep without needing extra help and support.
Amazing. Is it possible that, some naysayers will say that it's possible that they are okay to cry in the rest of the parts of the day, but it's only at night they have learned that this is when my cries will not be heard. So this is when I'm not going to cry and I'm just going to go to sleep because it's useless.
So there's two different sides of this, which is somebody saying, oh, a child can't learn to fall asleep on their own. That's impossible. So many children, even though you don't sleep train them, sleep just fine, and so the question is, well, what have they learned? How are they able to do it? How are they able to fall asleep? So clearly, children have the ability to learn how to go to sleep at night. So people are saying, oh no, well, they can't self-soothe, but they can learn that a parent is never going to come, and they can learn that only specifically in the sleep scenario, and so it's lots of things that if you're going on that path, you're saying that a child is learning very specific, very, contextualized things, and yet saying, oh, they can't learn a very simple, human skill, which is the ability to fall asleep. To say that they cannot have that skill or develop that skill again is just not congruent with what we know of biology of sleep.
Absolutely. I don't think of sleep training as teaching a child how to sleep. I mean, you can't teach somebody how to sleep. You're just teaching them how to sleep without needing the various sleep props, as we call them, or external sleep associations that you would call them.
That's right. Exactly. So, we as human beings and infants are also very, very smart. And so we learn very quickly what's in our environment when we transition from wake to sleep. And so behaviorally, we learn that, okay, this is what's in my environment. This is how I go to sleep. And learning new things is hard. It's hard for adults. An adult that has to have the TV on to fall asleep, if you take the TV out of the room, they're not going to be happy about that, right? And, adults, may get upset and, may say things. And the baby's way of saying, I don't like this new thing you're teaching me is with a cry. But it's the same concept. It's your brain has learned to depend on a sleep prop or a sleep onset association, and you're teaching them something different. And learning new things is hard. At every step of life, learning new things is hard.
I agree. It is contradicting when they say they're not able to learn how to sleep, but they're learning all these other things. So then in the same school of thought, the second thing that I hear a lot is babies cannot self-soothe because their prefrontal cortex is not developed enough to do that. So they're not learning anything. They're not self-soothing. They're just passing out from exhaustion.
Yeah.
So what is there any truth to this?
This is people that are using, fringe science. This is like knowing enough science to be dangerous by saying things like, oh, their prefrontal cortex isn't developed, etc. So my counter to that is when you look at just normative data regarding when parents report a child, quote unquote, sleeps through the night, which is, they have a chunk of sleep where they don't need, parental intervention or signaling. There is a certain chunk of children, even by 1 month of age. We're not even talking about sleep training, but by 1 month of age, they're actually able to, quote unquote, sleep through the night from 6 to 8 hours of what we'd consider uninterrupted sleep. In that situation, my question it would be, well, then what are they doing, right? If they're not able to have the skill to be able to fall asleep. Because we know that sleep occurs in cycles. We know that all human beings wake up multiple times at night. Infants wake up multiple times at night. We do sleep studies all the time in infants, and you can see on their EEG, their brain waves, they're waking up a lot. So what are those children doing when they're sleeping through the night? Well, they're waking up and going back to sleep. They have that skill of being able to go back to sleep. So we know children can do it. It's a complete falsity to say that children aren't able to go to sleep on their own, that they have to have something there, because it's just not true. We see children do it all the time, even without sleep training.
True. But again, if I want to be devil's advocate here, I think one thing that you will always hear, different children will do it at different times, right? Every child has their own timeline. They will sleep through the night when they are biologically ready to do so. So would you say that a 1 month old who is sleeping through the night naturally was ready to do so at 1 month of age? And if the child is not doing it 4 years of age, they're not biologically ready to do that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of factors that play a role in sleep, right? So when it comes to child's temperament, when it comes to their biological sleep need, when it comes to just the overall sleep pressure, we think, some children may develop a sleep pressure a little bit faster than other children. So there are lots of factors that play a role in when a child would, quote unquote, sleep through the night if they didn't have any sleep training whatsoever, for example. So are children able to do it at some point in their lives if you don't sleep train? Well, yes, they are. We've done long-term studies looking at children that are 5 or 6 years of age. And when we look at their overall sleep compared to children that were sleep trained, there's no real difference, down the road. So eventually all children can improve to a point of sleeping at a relatively kind of what we call, quote unquote, normal or average sleep timing and sleep quality. The challenge here is if a child has developed a habit, right? So they develop a habit that we can change and then improve how they sleep and how the caregiver sleeps, then that's a worthwhile intervention if a family is perceiving sleep to be a problem for them. And that's really where the core of this discussion comes into play, which is, a child can sleep any which way they want. They will get the sleep they need one way or the other. Most infants will get the sleep they need one way or the other. But the pattern in which they get that sleep can cause challenges with their overall sleep continuity, with the family's sleep continuity, and that has real consequences for the family as a whole. And so I say that, if the child has learned to do something in a way that we can improve it, and sleep is felt to be a problem for the caregiver, then why not use interventions that we know are safe and effective to help improve it? And that's what it really comes down to.
I think it's not just looking at what the child is capable of, but what the family needs as a whole, instead of, it's always like either their parents who are waiting it out, or they think there is cry it out and there is nothing in between, which we also now know is not exactly true. In Indian families in general, most parents are just waiting it out. And I always tell them that, like, don't you feel that the carrot always sort of gets a bit further away? Like when they're 3 months old, they say, oh, the very moment they turn 6 months old, they're going to start sleeping through the night because they start solids. And when they turn 6 months old, like, oh, no, that happens at 1 year. And then it just keeps going further and further away. And the parent is just like, when does this get better?
Yes. And that's the tricky thing about sleep, which is it certainly could. For many people that don't sleep train, it could be right around the corner. But then I also tell families that I see children that are 8 and 9 years of age that have to still sleep next to a parent and have a very specific sleep crutch, like holding on to the parent's ear or holding on to their clothes in order for them to fall asleep at nighttime. And so it can be tomorrow. It can be when they go to college. And I don't have a good way of distinguishing which one it's going to be for your child, right? And so if we have interventions that are safe and effective, why not consider using them if sleep is felt to be a problem for you? As long as you're doing it in the right context, right? So the right time, the right age, the right situation, the right setup, all those things are important.
Absolutely. And I think we can find out all of those things in your book. But I think you mentioned the word safe and effective. And I think most sleep professionals, who have a very data-backed approach to this, they use the word safe and effective very often. But sadly, the words that we often see associated with sleep training is harsh, traumatic, and something that can lead to an insecure attachment. And this is really where parents get really scared when they see words like this being associated with sleep training. So what is the truth behind sleep training? Is this really a traumatic experience for a child that can get them to distrust their caregiver and have poor outcomes in adulthood?
Well, the main thing that we have to look at when it comes to these questions is, what does the data show us? And so anyone that's saying that, sleep training is traumatic and it causes a poor attachment, et cetera, I simply ask them, well, where is that study? We can theorize and, give opinions all day long. We can take situations that don't apply to sleep training and then try to shoehorn them in to make it apply to sleep training, like many people that are opposed to sleep training have done. But my core question comes down to, well, where is your data? Where is the data that shows a sleep training as the intervention and then harm as an outcome? And people say, well, where's your data that says it's safe and effective long-term? And I show them the studies. There actually are studies. So people sometimes don't realize that studies have been done, both short and long-term, that look at these types of questions when it comes to children's mental health scores, when it comes to parental attachment scores, when it comes to sleep quality. Those studies have actually been done, looking 5-6 years out. And based on the data that we have, we feel that sleep training interventions are safe and effective. I have not seen any study that shows they've intervened with a sleep training behavioral approach at the appropriate age, the appropriate time, and then the child suffers a negative outcome when it comes to mental health, when it comes to sleep continuity, when it comes to parental mental health, etc. So it all comes down to, well, show me the study. And again, in the world of academia, I'm all about reading more studies and getting more information, always challenging what we believe. So it's not that I'm like, oh, you have to do this and I'm committed to this and everything else is wrong. It's, well, let's take the amount of knowledge that we have, look at it in an objective way to try to come up with an answer. And that's all that we're doing here. That's all that we're doing. And the objective answer based on the data that we have right now, the abundance of data that we have right now, is that sleep training is safe and effective and has positive short and medium term outcomes when it comes to sleep quality, parental mood scores, when it comes to marital satisfaction, so many factors that are so important for the health and well-being of a child.
Amazing. And I will definitely be linking down some of those studies for parents to read. Not all of us are sort of academics who keep up with the research, and I'm sure you do. I love that reel that you made, that I don't just keep up with the research, I am the research. And I think that was the biggest mic drop moment ever.
Yeah, I was being a little bit silly, in my response there. But yeah, research is, people are like, I did my research. Well, you can Google just about everything and find somebody that's supporting it. And they make it sound like it's actually based on research. People can use all the medical lingo and medical terms, and you're like, oh, this person sounds really trustworthy. When you dig down, it's actually, a lot of people are applying theoretical papers and theoretical opinions into this world. And that's not how we find objective truths, and we're looking for objective truths.
That's a very misguided approach. Like, I did once come across an article with, the title was 13 years of research suggests that sleep training is harmful. And I was like, oh my God, what is this 13-year-long research that I have in there? And guess what I find? Basically, it's the opinions of two child psychologists who have a combined experience of 13 years. And it's their opinion that sleep training causes trauma, causes attachment issues. And the clickbait article was that 13 years of research shows sleep training is bad.
These types of articles, I have so much sympathy for families, right? I mean, if I wasn't in sleep medicine and I read this type of stuff, I wouldn't sleep train, I would be scared to do that, And so it's not an easy time to be a parent, because you'll find so much information out there that's all over the place. It's mind-boggling and head spinning.
If I was a sleep-deprived parent, that would make me go nuts. Even if I have already sleep-trained my child, if I come across that article, I would be questioning every decision I have made with regarding to sleep training. But these studies that have been done, one of the very common criticism that is brought about is that these are parent-reported studies. Right? It's based from the parent's point of view, because of course we can't ask babies how they're feeling. So, that's like one limitation, right? But they say that, has anybody done an objective study of sleep training? Has anybody looked at brain scans or studied cortisol and then determined whether or not sleep training is good or bad? So has that been the case?
Yeah, so I'd say it all comes down to what metric you're using to determine effectiveness, right? So you're like, has anybody, we can't ask the baby. So what method do we want to use? And so certainly parental reported diaries are actually fairly accurate for infants when it comes to comparing it to gold standards like polysomnography or even actigraphy, which is essentially accelerometers, that we wear to determine when a child is awake and asleep. And so we certainly have sleep metrics we can look at. We have a variety of scales when it comes to mood and anxiety, et cetera, that they've looked at long term, which is 5-6 years out. But the important thing to keep in mind is that studies are expensive, and when we look at these big studies that have been done, you have to find a robust amount of funding to actually do these long-term studies. And so people are like, oh, why don't they just, do like 20 studies? Like, well, there isn't like a big sleep training company that's funding these types of studies, right? Like they have in the pharmaceutical industry. And despite that, there have still been many, many, many studies that have been done on behavioral interventions in children that do look at short, medium, and long-term outcomes, which is kind of a testament to the robustness of how much literature there really is. I'm happy to talk about other objective measures like cortisol, for example. So you mentioned cortisol. Like, has anybody studied cortisol? And interestingly, of all of the articles that are out there that look at sleep training, the one that ends up being kind of neutral-ish is the cortisol article that got all of this, rigmarole about cortisol started. And the answer is yes, people have looked at cortisol because they had to. After that article came out, they had to look at it in a robust, objective way. Because if you read the initial study about cortisol, you'll realize how fraught with issues it is if you are using that article to say cortisol increases in children with sleep training. It is fraught with challenges. And the first challenge is cortisol was never shown to increase in that paper.
It's the Middleman study, right?
That's right. I mean, it's, you go back to that paper, and just to set the scene here, people that are worried about, cortisol, that study looked at infants that were brought into a hospital setting, okay, taken away from the mother and left in a room with a nurse observing them while they cried it out, and then checked salivary cortisol levels in the mother and the child. Now, this is not how sleep training is done. And if you're like, oh, the child was stressed out, I was like, of course the child was stressed out, right? I mean, you're bringing them into a completely new environment and take them away from the caregiver, sticking things in their mouth to collect their saliva, and they have a stranger in the room. That's not an ideal scenario for sleep training. But despite that, they measured the level on day one of sleep training as it had started, and they measured it again when the sleep training intervention was over. And what did they show? Well, they showed that the infant's salivary cortisol remained the same during that time. And you're like, well, what was it at baseline compared to how much it changed? They never checked the baseline.
Like, that blew my mind.
Or they did and decided they didn't want to share that for whatever reason in the paper, right? But the conclusion of the paper was that mom's cortisol level went down during that time, and the baby's cortisol level stayed the same. And then they extrapolated that to say, look, mom isn't stressed anymore, but baby's still stressed, and that's not good because mom is no longer stressed. Well, maybe it's because, mom is an adult and knows that she's in a hospital setting and can rationalize where she is, and maybe she's getting a little bit more sleep because the infant is being cared for, by somebody else during a sleep training intervention. There are a variety of reasons, but that's not how we sleep train. That's not the reality of sleep training, and it didn't even show cortisol going up. So if anyone says, oh, cortisol increases, I ask the question again. Show me the paper that cortisol increased, and how much did it increase by? You will not find that paper. And that surprises people. Oh, I thought cortisol was the big thing. I thought people were worried about cortisol. There is no paper showing that cortisol increases in children that are sleep trained. And after that paper came out, because there was such a brouhaha about cortisol and people that were anti-sleep training decided they wanted to use that to support their approach, people had to follow that up by doing good studies on cortisol. And those studies actually show that cortisol decreases in infants after sleep training. So if you actually want to make the cortisol argument, I could fearmonger you the other way and say, oh my gosh, you're worried about cortisol? Well, the good studies actually show cortisol decreases after sleep training, but that is also not the right thing to do. We cannot take these types of studies if we don't have like 20 studies on a topic and then fearmonger you in the wrong direction, or the direction that we support because we want to extrapolate that data. But when it comes to cortisol, the data right now supports that it doesn't increase, it actually may decrease with sleep training. And that's the bottom line on the cortisol topic.
Cortisol is just thrown around. And sometimes I think people forget that it's just a normal body hormone. They are portraying cortisol as something that is toxic, that just increases in your body when your baby is crying or is stressed. Like, it's a regular body hormone. Your body's producing cortisol all day long.
That's a great point. Rinie, that's a great, which is going all the way back to, there's so many issues with the cortisol problem, which is it does not correlate perfectly with stress. Your cortisol level actually fluctuates wildly throughout the day. It's actually double at certain times than it is others. And so if I stop right there and said your cortisol is actually twice as high at certain times of the day, what time do you think that is? Let people just think about that for a second. And they'll probably be like, oh, I'm pretty stressed, midday, or I'm stressed early in the, at nighttime. Your cortisol is high in the morning. Like, as you're sleeping, as you're starting to wake up, that's when your cortisol is starting to increase. And you're like sleeping, And so it's not necessarily it's not a perfect correlate to stress. Cortisol is a very important part of your body, maintaining blood pressure, maintaining your blood sugar. It's a vital hormone.
Exactly. And I think cortisol, the fact that cortisol rises, it's not just about sleep training. One thing that I have seen parenting influencers in India use cortisol as an argument for co-sleeping. So now it's not just about sleep training. They're saying, okay, forget about independent sleep. Let's go back to co-sleeping, because that is a biological norm. That is what your instinct tells you to do. And now there are more influences. And I think there's this very viral read. I'm going to stitch it into this podcast. It has like 7 million overviews, which says that you have to co-sleep until your child is 7. And it is absolutely necessary. And the reel goes on to say that children who co-sleep until 7 are more stable neurologically because they have had the opportunity to co-regulate with their caregivers until a later age. I quote, they say they have a more stable nervous system because they're emotionally co-regulating with the parent. As a pediatric neurologist, not just a parenting influencer, as a neurologist, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I would say that some of the terms that you just thrown out as a neurologist have no idea what they even mean, right? When they say a more stable, nervous system, what does that mean? What does that mean? And so again, these are shock tactics that people like to use on social media to get lots of followers. And if somebody finds that they're saying it with such confidence, which they do, they say it with utter confidence, as if this is like written down somewhere in stone based on lots of studies. It all comes back to, well, be a critic. You should be a critic of what I'm saying. Be a critic of what you're saying. Be a critic of what that person. Just be a critic. And go dive a little bit deeper to be like, okay, what's this person's motivation? What research are they quoting? Do they have any research that they're actually quoting? And what is the validity of that research? And that's where it gets difficult. It's like, it takes a lot of effort to do that, right? It takes a lot of effort to dive deep into these people that seem like they are trustworthy. So again, it comes down to, if you're going to claim that, well, show me a study that shows that children do better. But when it comes to co-regulation of the nervous system, it's what you're doing while the child is awake that I think is more important, because the whole goal of nighttime is they're actually sleeping. So they're not really learning anything per se because they're asleep, right? And I'm not here to discuss what cultural norms should be. Everybody has their different approaches when it comes to co-sleeping. And as long as you're doing it safely after a certain age, I'm not saying you should or should not. That's up to you from a cultural standpoint. That's totally up to you. What I'm saying is that you should not be scared against doing what you think is right for you and your family based on what somebody's telling you that's not supported with any science.
Exactly. It's about going against the flow, which is harder in India. I got so much flack for making my baby sleep in a crib because I was very aware of the risk of SIDS, which is commonly dismissed in India. People think SIDS doesn't happen in India. If I ever make a reel about SIDS, which is a real risk, or SUID, if we want to be a bit more accurate in terms of the cause, they come and tell me that SIDS is a Western phenomena. It doesn't happen in India. And I kid you not, I've had comments that say it's because in India, parents love their kids more.
Wow, yeah.
And I'm just blown away by that.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge here is that there are definitely different numbers that come out from different countries regarding their risk of SUID and SIDS. And likely because we keep track of it differently, and I think, for example, in US, I think they're pretty robust in their record keeping and their diagnostic criteria. In other countries, they may code it differently, for example. And when we look at large studies, it's based on how it's coded in the medical data. And I can't reflect on how it might be coded in India and what those numbers might be. But I'll tell you that, SIDS happens everywhere. SUID happens everywhere. It's just unfortunately a phenomenon. And we think there's a myriad of factors that play a role in it. Not just the safe sleep environments, but also likely the factors that are respiratory control and depth of sleep. And there could be many, many factors that end up playing a role. So it happens everywhere, unfortunately. And I think safety for infants is critical.
Yeah, I think that it's basically because SIDS and SUID is so well studied and, like you said, well documented in the US, which is why a lot of the safe sleep practices, they do come from the US and then they're adopted in other countries. In India specifically, the challenge is that suicide as a cause of infant death is not even in highlight in India because they are still struggling with waterborne diseases and other kind of diseases that are increasing the infant mortality. That they are like, you know what, suicide is not even on our radar for us to go out and spread awareness about and do something about because we are too busy fighting cholera and typhoid in young babies.
Yeah, and that might be that, I think we're very privileged in the US that when it comes to some of the infectious diseases, we are very fortunate in many ways that we don't have to worry about those things that may put babies at higher risk in other countries. But, again, if there are things that we can do to increase overall safety, in addition to all those other public health measures to increase public safety, why not push that? And I'm hoping that pediatricians there help push that message.
Interestingly enough, similar to the AAP, the IAP, the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, they have the same safe sleep guidelines. They do recommend the same thing, that you should be room sharing and not bed sharing. And it's there if anybody goes and bothers to read it, but they don't.
I'm glad that they mimic the AAP guidelines. That's great.
But I don't think that's the case on ground. Like I said, it's just so deeply rooted in culture, the co-sleeping practice. That's what's recommended by doctors, by lactation consultants, and basically by the whole ecosystem. So that's where parents, again, they question their choice a lot, and they're given a lot of flack for it if they choose to go the other way.
Yeah, the challenge here is, if you're going against cultural norms, my goal is let's empower you with the choices that you have, and let's let you know what the safe choices are and what the effective choices are, and empower you with those choices. I will tell you that if you go into a home where you have somebody that's listening to your podcast and 5 other family members have not heard your podcast, it's going to be very challenging for this individual to go in there and say, well, sleep is not where we need it to be, and we need to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And I get that. I wrote a book. I'm a child neurologist. I did a fellowship in sleep training. When I wanted to sleep train my children, my parents were like, no, you can't do that. You can't let a child, cry, or you can't let them fuss at night. And I'm like, well, this is kind of what I do for a living, and I've written a book about it. And they're like, no, you can't do that, right? So these are cultural things that we're fighting against, in the South Asian Indian culture. And I get it. And I completely understand where they're coming from. Then they saw the results of what happened after sleep training and realized, oh my gosh, wow, your children sleep well. They go to bed happy. They wake up happy. Everybody's getting the rest that they need. And that's what ended up turning the page for them. I was seeing it in real life. But unfortunately, a lot of people are not in that position to be like, well, this is what I do for a living, and I know this is the right approach for me and my family. But even for me, it was hard as a sleep physician to convince my parents that this is what had to be done. Completely understand and sympathize with people that are out there that are in this position.
The purpose of this podcast is really just to equip them with the tools to convince at least the people around them that, like, hey, I'm making the best choice for my child. I have done my research. I am listening to the right professionals. So I've got this, just giving them the I've got this confidence.
I love it.
That is basically what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Right? Whether or not they decide to sleep train. So
yes, empower you. Choices. Yes, I love it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because I think like you said, right? Like, more power to you, and you've got this. That's just not cutting it anymore.
That's not cutting it. And people are, people and babies are miserable. If they're waking up, 5-10 times at night and constantly needing a sleep prop to get back to sleep. It's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for the child to have to wake up that many times and cry to get put back to sleep. That's not fun for anybody.
These were the 5 sort of big statements, concerns that we see around sleep training that I'm so glad I've had the chance to clarify them with you. I really hope this podcast gets to as many people as possible, just so that they can have the freedom and the knowledge to make that choice for themselves.
Absolutely. So let's empower them with the knowledge. And I will send you an article, a nice review article, looking at 52 studies at sleep training and the results of that particular article. It breaks it down nicely based on the results. So.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's put all the resources down in the caption so people can go and explore it by themselves. And Dr. Kansagra, do you have anything else you want to share before we end this recording today?
Yeah, we talked a lot about sleep, but I'll tell you that when it comes to parenting, I always like to say there's no right way. There's no 100% right way. And I'll tell you that it's, you can raise a child a million different ways and still raise a healthy, thriving, happy child. And so just keep that in mind. If your child is happy, they're thriving, they feel safe and secure, you're probably doing it right. You're probably
That's
doing
amazing.
It right. So
yeah, I think there's that quote, right? That if you are questioning if I'm a good parent, you probably are.
That's right. Absolutely. I love that. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us so many reassuring opinions. It was lovely connecting with you today. And thank you everyone who's listening. If you like this episode, do like, share, subscribe, and follow us for more evidence-backed parenting content.